Welcome everybody. Welcome to DevCon 2019. Actually, I'm curious, how many of you in the audience here, this is your first DevCon? Whoa, geez, that's a good amount of people in here. Awesome. Welcome, thanks for coming. Welcome to Building Polished Interfaces. My name is Matthew Odell. I used to run my own design shop called Big Buffalo Design, but I've recently joined Capital One. Also used to work with iSolutions and Slind, and for 7 years actually worked at FileMaker. But as we've seen this already, I'm going to put it up one last time. For today's session, it is a hands-on session, which means a few things. It means it's 2 hours and 15 minutes. If you did not see that on the schedule and are ready to spend 2 hours and 15 minutes in here, it's fine if you leave now. I'm completely all right with that, but I wanted to set expectations. This is hands-on. We're going to be in here for a while. We have a sample file that we'll be using for certain activities today. That's at the link there. If you don't have that, actually, is anybody still writing that down, or does everybody have it at this point? Okay. I'll give you another minute as you guys write that down. Feel free to keep going to that. If you are a neighbor and have the link already and want to give it to the person sitting next to you, that's great. But secondarily, some of the activities we're going to be doing, it's helpful if you have your own solution. So if you have a solution that you can either download or get access to, the internet here is not that great, as many of you have probably experienced already yourself. So if you can download your solution just to have at the ready, that would be awesome. We cool with that link? If the people that are walking in, can your neighbors share the link to the people walking in? We'll bring it back up later if we need it, but okay, cool. So let's dive in. My name is Matthew Odell. I live in Oak Park, just outside of Chicago. This is my wife, our daughter. This is right when we moved. My daughter's a lot bigger now. She's 3 years old. That's our pug, Mosley. I am a, oh, come on. Everybody's like, these things, why aren't they working? Sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. I am a designer. Most recently, I do UX design as well as process and ecosystem design. That's my role right now at Capital One that I've been doing for the past 3 months. I'm also a trainer. I have a degree in education, actually music education of all things. This is me recently in a recording studio with my band. But I love training, love teaching people. It's a big goal of mine. And I started my life as a developer. I was a FileMaker developer. That was my first job out of college, was as a FileMaker developer and a PHP MySQL developer. That's what I did way back in the day before I am here as you see me now. So as we said, today's session is about building polished interfaces. And hopefully most of you are here, understand the concept of why you should polish something, because I mean, why would you be here if you weren't? But I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about it, because maybe you have to validate why you're spending this time to your management or to the people you're working with. In many cases, when I talk to people about building or spending the time polishing a solution, I normally get this kind of answer: sorry, I'm just too busy. There's too much stuff going on. I just really don't have time to make something look good. My client isn't paying me to make it look good. They're just paying me to get something out the door and have something work for them. And that's an answer that you could say. But one of the problems with that is people these days, expectations for applications that people are using are climbing. These days, on average, mobile users have about 80 different apps installed on their phone. Of those 80 apps, about 30 of them they use monthly, and about 9 of them they use daily. And of those apps that they're using every day, and I'm assuming most of the solutions we're building are solutions people are going to be using consistently and every day, they have super high expectations for those solutions. Oh, sorry, I skipped that one too quick. The majority of reports and surveys point to the top 4 reasons why 80% of users delete an app after using it for the first time are bad design, poor user experience, and slow load time. How many of us have used a FileMaker solution that has bad design, poor user experience, and slow load time? Right? So this is people are deleting apps because they have those 3 things. Okay, we got to be careful with that. Also, another tech beacon that did their own report said users are intolerant of problems with an app, especially repeated problems, and are quick to abandon, and a vast majority will only give a problem app up to 3 chances. and then they won't use it anymore. So imagine you launching your solution to other people that you work with or to your customer if you're a consultant, and they only give it about 3 chances before they're like, I'm done with this. This thing doesn't work for me. Bad experience, bad design, slow load times. So expectations are super high for the applications we're building these days. So our agenda for today in terms of building polished solutions are going to focus in 3 areas. First area is putting stuff in the right place. Where am I going to put stuff in my solution as a whole and then on an individual layout? Once I put that thing somewhere on my layout and in my solution, I want to make it look good. And then lastly, I want to make it interactive. I want people to know how to interact with my solution. And actually, I'm going to bring up before we hop into the rest of this, I'm going to say one other thing. The reason I really wanted to do this, this session is because as a UX designer working with developers, there are many times that I would hand over stuff to developers, and I thought I had everything pixel perfect and it made sense exactly what it was going to be, but there were always these little things that would just make it seem a little bit unprofessional. And so that's some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about, those little things that just make it seem a little unprofessional and how to make those a little bit better. And so to help me with this is my assistant in the back, Kristen. Kristen, can you wave your hand? Kristen is my assistant because for about 2.5 years, she was unfortunately the bear of my ire as a designer. And has improved very much. And so Kristen has learned a lot over the years, and so that's why she's perfect for this, because she's been in your shoes with me talking down to her about why to do things in certain ways. Yeah, Kristen will say I'm trying to be nice about it, but not always. It depends. This is what we're going to talk about today. As I mentioned, today's session is hands-on. So a few warnings on this. Again, it's 2 hours and 15 minutes that we're going to be here. It's going to be a mixture of me talking and then me giving you exercises. I'm going to give you time during those exercises. Kristen and I are going to be walking around trying to answer questions if you have them. I will say, though, even though 2 hours and 15 minutes seems like a lot of time, we probably won't have enough time to really dive in and do all of these activities to its full completion. So what I'd hope that we can do today is at least spend a few minutes on each activity so you get an idea of what it's like. Spend the time asking questions so you know how to take it from here and where to take that activity to the next level when you're not in this room with us. So that's what I hope to get out of those few minutes that we have. Start doing it, get a sense of what it is, ask the questions that you have, and then we can move on. Sound good? And I will say, I think we are the last thing in this room. So if it gets to the very end of this at 3:45 and you want to keep working on your thing and you want me to give you guys some feedback on stuff, I'm happy to stick around for a little bit past that. So just as a heads up. Okay, so let's start with the first thing, putting stuff in the right place. To put stuff in the right place, there are 3 different areas or topics that I want to cover. The first one is information architecture, understanding how our information is grouped and organized so that people know where to go to get what they need. Our next one is visual hierarchy. How do I place stuff on a layout so that users know how things relate to one another? And then lastly, grids and guides. How do I use grids and guides to make sure I'm placing stuff consistently on a layout so that it looks polished and also helps people be able to scan and read the information that they need? Now, many of you are like, hey, you're talking about polishing a layout. That kind of means I already have a layout, right? And I'm just applying polish to it. Well, there's a phrase. You can't polish a turd. Right? Now, many of you, actually, how many of you are Mythbusters fans? Do I have any Mythbusters fans in the audience? I got a few of them. For those of you, have you seen this episode? Do you know what this episode is? This is an episode where they were trying to test different idioms. And one of the idioms they test is, can you polish a turd? And they said, no, you can't really, but you can kind of make a ball that has super high shine on it by using this Japanese process of rubbing and doing dirt. So you can make a turd with shine on it, but you can't technically polish it. So this is why we're starting at information architecture. This is why we're starting back here, is because you need to have a sense of where to put stuff first before you can make it look good. If it's not in the right place and people don't know where to find stuff, then it's just like putting lipstick on a pig. I'm all idioms this morning, this afternoon. That's what's going to happen, all right? It's just putting lipstick on a pig. So we need to do this first. This is the first thing we're going to do. For those of you who don't know what information architecture is, I'm going to steal a definition from Wikipedia, one of my favorite definitions. They have a few there. But one is the art and science of organizing and labeling websites, internets, online communities, and software. Obviously, we're mostly software, to support findability and usability. The main words there, findability and usability. We want to architect our information and our solutions so that users can find the information and the tasks that they need to do to get their work done. So let's take an example of this. Let's pretend we own a record store. This is Val. Val unfortunately passed away a year ago. She owned Val's Holla record store that was just around the corner from my house in Oak Park, Illinois. But let's pretend we are Val and we own a record store. How are most record stores organized? Does anybody want to just? I heard genre. What else did I hear? Alphabetical, artist, yeah. Okay, so generally, and you can kind of see it a bit in this picture, the main way that I see it is it's first by media type, right? Like I put all the records in one place, and I put all of the CDs in one place, and I put all the cassette tapes that you see in the back there in one place. Then by genre, then alphabetical by artist, right? This is a common thing that you see in most record stores. And why do you see it? Well, because the task that the user is trying to accomplish, or a certain customer of that store is trying to accomplish is, well, you know what? I probably know what media format I support, right? Like I know I have a record player, so I'm going to go look at the records. I know I have a CD player, so I'm going to go look at the CDs. So I go to the area that I want. Then I'm doing one of two things. Either I'm looking for a specific artist, and I probably know what genre that artist is, so I can go to an area and go through and find that specific artist. Or I'm the type of person that just really likes rock music and is curious what is in these record bins, so I flip. How many of us have done that in a record store? Just flip, right? You spend like half an hour flipping. I've spent way too much time at Val's doing this, right? Flip. And so this is set up for very specific use cases of what the people are doing when they come into the store. But this isn't the only use case. And actually, this isn't the only way records are organized at a record store, even Val's record store. They also have another section called New Releases that is completely separate from the rest of these, because this has a completely different use case, right? This is probably someone that comes into the record shop every week, and they're curious what came in recently, what's new, what's interesting. I'm just a music lover, and I'm curious about what came in. Or in many cases, I know a new record came out, and I want to find it, but I don't want to have to go through the stacks and go through the type and genre and all that kind of stuff. If it's sitting right at the front, I'm going to find it right away. So even within the same record store, I'm organizing in different ways for different tasks that users are trying to accomplish. But this isn't the only way you can categorize records. For those of you who have seen High Fidelity, anybody seen the movie High Fidelity? Right? You know this scene very well where the character Rob decides he's going to organize his record collection autobiographically. And so the quote in that is, if I want to find the song Landslide by Fleetwood Mac, I have to remember that I bought it for someone in the fall of 1983 pile, but I didn't give it to them for personal reasons. So this is a completely different way of categorizing records about how he's thinking about where do I go and I have to look within my life to understand where that thing is placed. But there are other ways that we can categorize records. What are some other ways that we could potentially categorize records? And then what would be the purpose if we categorized it that way? Does anybody have an idea? Yep, right here.
Color of the album.
By the color of the album. And then what would be the usefulness of that? How would I use that?
Well, you might think, oh, I'm sure that's a brown album.
I'm a person who is very visual, and I know that the cover was brown. So I'm going to go look in the brown LPs, and it'll probably be somewhere in there. That's a good one. Right in the front here?
Very helpful for the white album.
Not so much for the white album, yeah.
You might go by the record label and catalog number.
Record label and catalog number. So if you're the type of person that knows what the different record labels are and go around and find it that way, okay? Say that again? Decades, or yeah, by date, you can say in a certain case. That might be interesting because I want to see hey, these were all records that came out around the same time, and then these other records were influenced by them, so I can kind of see the trajectory of how music morphs over time. Other ideas? By mood? Yeah, I could do it by mood. What is the general mood of that record? So if I'm the type of person who's like, well, I'm really kind of contemplative right now and I need some music that helps me think, I can go to that kind of part of my records. That's useful. Right here? Say that again? By price, yeah, the ones I spend a lot on, I'm gonna put up the top shelf. That's kind of more of like a bar analogy, right? You put all the high price stuff at the top. So there's a lot of different ways that you can organize this information, and all of it is based around the use case of what I'm trying to get out of it, okay? That's what information architecture is. It's figuring out how do I organize this to facilitate whatever that task is that I'm trying to accomplish, right? So all of these are different tasks, and I can organize those records in different ways to fit those tasks. So when I'm doing some sort of information architecture inventory, I'm normally doing two things. I get a list of things, and then I give those things attributes or relationships. So in this case, the things were records, and the attributes were genre, artist, year that it came out, the color of the album. All of those are different attributes. Now, these are things we're probably all used to as FileMaker people, right? It just sounds like tables and fields, right? That's kind of what we're seeing here, right? It's like that, but it's more than just that. When we're creating inventories within FileMaker of our solutions, there we go. When we're creating these kind of information architecture inventories, we're doing more than just data. We're very used to categorizing our things like our records and our fields and understanding how they relate. We all do data modeling. We generally know how that works. Or if you don't, I'd definitely say go and take an intro course on data modeling. That will definitely help you. But we need to do more than that. We need to actually catalog the tasks, the scenarios, the things that users are trying to do, the questions that they're trying to answer, the stories of where they're at as they're trying to answer those questions. And we want to categorize those things. That's the stuff that is information architecture really is. It's about think about putting together a sitemap for a website. Every piece of content that's on that website has attributes about what is the user trying to do when they are looking at that content, and where are they at in their journey, in their story, and when do I need that in that case. So this is even more important. This is the stuff that we really need to do, where I think a lot of people do this stuff at the top and don't really think about the tasks and do those kind of inventories. And doing these inventories can help us in two ways. One, doing these inventories can help us do better navigation. And the second way is by better organizing our layouts. How do we put together the information on our layouts so that I can find the information I need and the tasks that I need and the tasks I'm trying to accomplish? How many of us have seen solutions like this, where basically every major table has a link at the top of the screen? How many of us have built this solution? I have too. I'm not just raising my hand as an example. I've done it too. And this is actually from a client of mine. We took over one of their solutions. This was their navigation. Oh, and by the way, even though every major one there were 6, they actually had about 10, so they just put a more button at the end that had a popover for the 5 other things that they needed, right? And everything was a list in detail. Actually, I should ask, how many of you went to Alexis Allen's session yesterday about breaking out a list in detail? If you didn't, I highly suggest going back and getting the recording of that. I'm only going to cover it a little bit in this session, but if you want a further depth about how to do this kind of stuff, go back and listen to that session from Alexis Allen. I think it's called Breaking Out of Form and List View, or List and Form View, something along those lines. But we've all done this, and this is kind of how we're used to looking at things. So let's take a different example. This is a different client of mine. This is a client that owns a company that will hire out stage crew for different events. So if you're running an event and you need some people to show up to set up a stage or to run AV or do any of those kind of stuff, you call this company, they find the crew, they send them to the event for you, all right? So when I was doing the research with this customer and understanding what they're trying to do, these were the main tables that came out of it. So they have a shows table. This is a show. That show might have multiple shifts, right, across multiple days, but it's one show. That show also has an estimate that I could prepare and send over to them. Shifts have timesheets. A shift also, or excuse me, a show also has invoices, and then there are crew members and customers. Probably all seems familiar. We kind of all generally get the data model around this, right? And then down below it are a lot of the tasks that they're trying to create. There's obviously the ability to create a show, create a shift, create an estimate, but then even down lower, changing status. And then we get into some of the questions that they're trying to answer, like, well, for shows, I want to know how many shows are like tentative and I haven't booked yet. They're still kind of sitting there in a tentative thing. I want to know those. I want to know how many shifts do I need to assign a crew to. The shift's there, but I haven't done my work in terms of assigning the crew, so I want to know that. I want to know how many shifts are waiting for crew to confirm that they actually, I assign them, but are they can actually come or not? And there's a bunch of different questions there. These are all of the different scenarios and tasks and things that the users have had to do within the solution. It's not all of them, but it's a lot of them. You wouldn't want to see the full list. That's the starting point. And most of us, though, build our solutions like this, though, right? There's a question about, actually, I'm going to try to use this. There's a question about what shows are waiting for me to confirm. And so what we do is we take them to a list in detail of shows, and then we have a button at the top that says, hey, show me all shows that are waiting to confirm, right? Or we have a shifts layout that has a list in detail, and we have a button on there that says, find me all shifts that need crew. This is something we're used to doing, and it's easy. I'll be completely honest. It's an easy thing that you can do as a FileMaker developer and designer to just go and follow that pattern. But we asked more questions. We didn't just ask this. We started asking questions like, well, what things are you doing most frequently? And they're like, well, I'm really doing all the editing stuff around a show, but I don't really get a lot of new crew members. They come in every now and again, but not too many. And I do create new customers, but I don't really edit and delete customers that often. I'm not really touching that too often. Those are things I don't do that often. What else? We started asking, well, what are the first things you do in the morning when you come into the office? What are the things you're interested in? Well, I want to answer all of these questions. What are all of the things that I have to do? I want to know what shows I have to confirm. I want to look at the calendar to see what the calendar looks like. I want to see what shifts I need to assign crew for. I want to see what timesheets are ready for me to enter. I've gotten the timesheet as a PDF, but I need to enter it into the system. These are the questions I want to answer. And actually, it's not just in the morning. I come back multiple times in the day and want to answer all of these questions. Are any of these tasks related? Well, yeah, actually, you know what? I did say that I create customers a lot. But to be completely honest, I would never create a customer on its own. The only way that I would ever create a customer is if I'm creating a show for that customer. Right? I'd never really go and just, hey, I'm going to create a new customer and maybe there's a show in 6 months or something. No, it's like, oh, I have a new show. All right, let me add the customer. All right, it's part of that process. Those two tasks are related. Also, they never really care about all shifts other than looking at it on the calendar. They never really care about all estimates. They're always like, I want to see a show and see that show's estimate. I want to see a show and I want to see that show's timesheets. I want to see a show and see that show's shifts. I'm never really looking at a long list of all of these things. So all of those are children of shows. If I can go to a show's place, then I can see the other information as necessary. So this was the final map that we kind of came up with, where when they log into the system, we created a dashboard. And we put all of those questions on that dashboard. Basically, they can answer all of those questions when they first log in. And anytime that they want, they can go back to that dashboard from any page and answer those questions again, because they want to do that time and time again. Are there new shifts that I have to add crew to? Are there shifts that haven't been confirmed yet? Okay, I'm going to keep going back to that. Then we created a calendar section, and we created that has the ability to see all shifts on a calendar. And we have a show section where I can go and look at a show list if I need to and filter it in different ways. I will say here, the dashboard as well as the calendar will link into a show detail. So I'll click on something here and it kind of takes me into this realm down at the bottom here that sits down here in terms of like a show detail. Everything kind of links to that detail. But that's where I do the rest of the information. That's where I handle the rest of it is by having these three. This is basically my main nav at the top are those three options. And then once I click on the thing I want, it'll take me into the stuff where I can do the rest of this. All right? Then all of the crew and customer stuff, we put in an admin section. It sits on the home screen on the dashboard. They can get to it from there. But on most layouts, they can't get to it because they don't do it that often. They don't really care about it that often. So it sits over on the side. It's not part of the main nav. It's just an extra little button that takes them into that section if they need it. Okay, so here's exercise 1. This is where we're going to dive in and actually start doing some exercises. You have some paper, or we handed out some paper. If you don't have a pen, we do have a few pens we can hand out. So when we get started here, raise your hand and we'll bring you a pen. But what I would like you to do is to create a data and task inventory of your own solution. This is where it's helpful to have your own solution. If you don't have your own solution in mind, or have it already, try to use your mind to remember what are the different tasks and questions and things that people are trying to answer and do within your solution. And then after you have that first list of all of the different tables and all the different tasks, start to ask these questions like, how frequently do I use it? How are these tasks related? Do I do these tasks at the same time or not? And start to think about what are the things that they're doing most frequently. Start to think of it in those different ways. And we're going to take about 5 minutes on this as the example of, we're probably not going to have time to do this in full, but try your best to get this going, even if you just want to take a portion of your solution. But let's start by creating this task inventory and start to think about how these things group in different ways. Any questions about this before we get started?
Could you go back to the previous screen so I could show?
This one? Yes. I'll go back to this previous screen. And we got some hands for pens. Kristen's walking around handing out pens, so if you hold your hand up, just give Kristen a wave and she'll bring you a pen. Everybody's got paper. All right, we've got 5 minutes. Oh yeah, question here. Oh, we're waiting for the pen? Okay, we got a pen in the front we need, right here. Oh, you know what, I'll bring you one. There you go, sir. Okay, 5 minutes on this, and then we'll pause for 2 minutes for questions after the 5 minutes are up. And I will say, if you have a question or are stuck at something or not sure about something, raise your hand. Kristen and I will come around and help you out. And yeah, that's actually a great thing as well. And one of the reasons why when we build FileMaker solutions, we're just not building FileMaker solutions. We are working on processes with people. One example is actually with this stage crew company. We were asking them about like, well, how do we figure out what the rate is that you're going to pay your crew at for the time that they work? And they're like, well, each crew kind of has their own rate sheet, and then depending upon the job or the role that they're in, and there are 50 roles, they have a different rate for each of those roles, and you're just like, oh, can we not do that? Like, that's probably really hard for you to upkeep, and they're like, yeah, and actually there's a lot of weird questions that people ask about, like, what's your rate on this? And it's like, well, my rate's higher than yours, and so I'm like, how about we like do this as a tier thing? Like, and then you have some sort of rules with your crew about like after you've done a specific thing or you've gotten a forklift certification, so you move up a tier or something. Like, how about you do that? They're like, that's a great idea. We should do that. And we worked on them and came up with some rules for them to help their business because they were like, all of their 200 people had a different rate sheet for the 50 different things that they were doing. It was crazy, really tough. Other examples where this might have been tough? Agreed, yeah, and it is tough when you have solutions that have a bunch of different users and you start asking yourself, do I have one layout for all of these people or do I start having different layouts for different people? It's a tough question. Okay, so we're going to move on here. Again, hopefully that gave you a taste of this type of work of like grouping things together. And I should say, hopefully maybe out of this you might maybe have one layout or the beginnings of a layout of like, all right, I'm going to answer these questions or do these things on this one place. So we're going to use that coming up next, which is visual hierarchy. So that information architecture, and actually the reason I keep saying information architecture instead of IA is because I always say AI instead. My dyslexia just like flips them around and I can never say it right, which is really bad because my boss is an IA expert. And so I say, you know, the AI stuff, and she's like, you mean IA? And I'm like, you're right, I did not, I said it wrong.
Besides that, AI means artificial insemination in some fields.
Then that's even worse. Luckily, I'm in finance and not in medical, but yes. So visual hierarchy. Visual hierarchy refers to the arrangement or presentation of elements in a way that implies importance. So, okay, those are a lot of words. I'm just going to show this to you guys visually. Did you guys read it in that order? You read it backwards? You just read it backwards? So in this case, we're using positioning and size to say, I'm probably going to read the headline first. That's going to draw my eye in, and then I'm going to read down from there. It doesn't have to necessarily be top to bottom like this. So what about this one? Did most people, or how many people didn't read it in order? I'll probably ask that. I got one, but most people, or a few. Most people read that in the order in which it is, because the color and the size brought me into the middle first. That was the first thing I saw. And then I realized there was something up here, so I'll go over there, and then I'll go down to the bottom. Right? This is what visual hierarchy is. It's using things like size, position, and alignment, and color to do two things. One, to draw your eye to something. So I know, what am I supposed to be looking at? What's the most important thing that I should be looking at right now? But also to group things together. It's helpful in that if I'm using visual hierarchy, I can say these things are all part of the same thing, and that these things are all part of the same thing. Using, again, size, position, and color, I can show that. So again, we don't have a lot of time today, so I'm going to give you guys a few tips and tricks for building your own visual hierarchy. So let's start with something simple like the Contacts app on an iPhone. One simple technique that you can use if you're new to visual hierarchy is the concept of outside in. So on the very outside of this layout, or the very outside of this screen, is information about the phone and navigation for the phone. That is the most global thing here, right? I have a phone and I want to navigate between the apps, and I want to see what time it is and if I'm connected to the internet and what my battery is. Just inside of that are bits of information about the solution I'm in. I'm in the contact solution, so I want to be able to navigate to different parts of the solution. And I also have a plus button to add new contacts at any point in time and do some editing things. Now you might say, like, well, is this plus button adding a new favorite? Is it part of the favorites or is it part of the solution? Well, it's part of the solution because it's really on every screen I go to. Every screen I go to has a plus button for me, so it's really part of that. Inside the solution, I have the things that I am looking at. So in this case, I am looking at favorites, and so I have something that's telling me about those things that I'm looking at. And then I have an individual thing, or in this case, multiple individual things that I am looking at. Right? So I'm building from the phone to the app to the stuff inside the app to the individual thing, outside in. Does anybody have any questions on that? Does that make sense? Let's do it again. This time, this is the Spark email app. Sorry, it's a little dark up there. But same kind of concept. On the outside, I have my phone stuff, my navigation, and my information. I have some solution information that allows me to navigate up at the top here, navigate between the different mailboxes I have and the ability to search. And I have some solution things on the bottom here that allow me to create new emails and such. I then have the things I'm looking at right now, which are the seen emails, and then I have the individual email itself, or list of emails, outside in, okay? That's one type of visual hierarchy. It's not the only one. Something that's used on desktops in a lot of cases, what you'll end up seeing is kind of top left to bottom right. And so this is Adobe XD. It's a solution that I use to build prototypes. And do visual mock-ups of stuff. And you'll see here Adobe XD at the top and on the left have stuff about the solution, about being in XD. I have the tools that are available to me. I have the ability to edit this file I'm in and go into different modes and share this file. Then I have the things that are within this file, the different artboards that I have and the different designs that I'm working on. And then if I click and select one of those things within that area, I have on the side panel there, this thing does not like me today, the things area over on the side, or the thing area on the side there. So top left to bottom right. One more example. This is the solution we ended up mocking up for Superior Stage, that stage company I was just talking about, stage crew company. So at the top, we have our solution information, our navigation that takes me to the different areas. I have that add show button at the top there. You might say like, well, that's not really solution-based. It's like, well, it is because they want to be able to do that from anywhere. So that's now a solution thing. So it's up in that solution area. Then I'm on the dashboards, or the dashboard section, so I want to see the different types of dashboards that I have available to me. Well, I'm on the scheduling dashboard, so I want to see the different things that are part of the scheduling dashboard. And because I've selected one of those things, I'm then going to go down to the individual thing. Top left, bottom right. Questions on this concept of visual hierarchy? Okay, so here's what we're going to do next. Or actually, sorry, a bad example first. I've been showing great examples. Let's show you a bad example first. So Mark Baum is doing a session actually at the same time right now, so I feel completely all right using this. He asked me, as well as a few other designers, to mock up or to like take some solutions that he had from some clients that were in-house, or that they had in-house that his company was working on. And he's like, how would you redesign this? And so he sent me this. And I was like, all right, this is interesting. What is the visual hierarchy of this? Well, up at the top, I have some solution things, but not all of the things at the top relate to the solution as a whole. Some of them do. I also have this records navigator kind of sitting in the middle here. So I'm looking at the solution, then I have, well, the table I'm on or the things I'm on. Well, that's kind of sitting right in the middle there, kind of in no man's land. That's kind of odd. I have some invoice information here, but then I have payments information about that invoice is spread down here and up here, and if I have shipping information, that's up here, down here, and over here. So things are spread out, they're not connected, they're disjointed. And I mean, I wouldn't say that this is necessarily a bad solution. It's not horrible. I'm sure the people that use this can get around and get to the stuff that they need to, but it's not very helpful. It's not being as helpful for them as it probably could be. So here's what we're going to do next. So take a layout that you might have come up with as part of the first exercise we did, or if you didn't get to that level, take a layout from your solution. And what I want you to do is create an inventory of all the things that are on that layout. And then I want you to take all of those things and tasks and buttons and bits of information, and I want you to group it by what things are kind of solution-based. What are things that are more holistic about the solution? What things are about the individual table I'm looking at? So if I'm looking at invoices, what thing relates to all of the invoices? And then think about the record itself. So I'm on a specific invoice, what things relate to that? And then if I have related information, come up with potentially some multiple groups about the related information for that. So in the case of the invoices, I have line items, I have shipping information, I have payment information. So take it and create that inventory, a same type of IA, I did it right, yeah, IA inventory, and group it together in this way. Any questions before we start? All right, another 5 minutes, let's go. Actually, I should say, if you have time after you do this, start to sketch out on the paper here, how you might organize those things using an outside-in principle or a top left to bottom right principle, okay? All right. So we went over on time on this one. This was a little tough one, which is fine. I'm happy we spent a little bit of time on it. And I think this is actually probably a little bit telling for the few people I talk to, and I'm sure there's others that are struggling through this same activity, where a lot of FileMaker developers like to put everything on one layout. Right? This will help you stop that. So one of the questions, a great question I had in the front here was like, I get these complaints from users that there's just too much information. He's like, but all the information is useful, like they'll need it at some point. And I'm like, and that's kind of the thing though, they only need it at some point. They don't always need it. There's a phrase called progressive disclosure. Have any of you heard that phrase before, a few people? The idea of progressive disclosure is that I don't need to show you everything at once. I'm only going to show you the most important stuff first. And then if you decide that you want more information, I will give you a button or put something behind a tab or move something a little bit somewhere else so I can decide I want to go see that and not have it all in the same layout at the same time all the time. right? So that's something that you'll want to start thinking about of like, what is the most important stuff? And that's why it's helpful to get the buttons and the data, like the things about that thing grouped together. So like these are all things that are about this student's registration and history of all the courses that they've taken. Here's information about their payments and finance. Here's all of the buttons and tasks and data about this. Group them together in that way because so one solution someone showed me, they had a bunch of buttons at the bottom and they were all really attached to this portal that was called Finances. And it's like, well, how many of those buttons relate to that finance portal? Well, only this one button. Well, what do these other buttons do? Well, this one's about their class history. Well, where's their class history information or the registration information? It's over here. Why is that over here and this button over here? Those two things belong together. This is the type of work that we have to do, and we really have to spend our time thinking about how things go together, right? So I can know if I'm interested in history or the history of this student and their stuff, I go to this one area of the layout to see all of that information and the buttons that can progressively disclose more information if I want to go to it. Am I making sense there? Or is anybody still struggling a little bit with this concept? It is tough. It's tough if you've never done this before. But this is super imperative. Again, you can put polish on something, but if people can't find the information they need or the buttons that they want or the tasks that they need to accomplish, then the stuff that we're going to talk about after this doesn't really mean much. Okay? Yeah.
Sometimes isn't it very annoying when you go to one page and you got to click in the back page to get more information, you got to click in the back and you got to click in the back end.
It can be. And I should say of any of the recommendations I'm making here, it is completely dependent upon the research you do with your users. And so if you have some users that do have a 27-inch monitor and can handle looking at everything at once, and that's fine for them, and you can visually do a visual hierarchy so that they know where to look for that thing, more power to you. Do it. That's fine. You know your users better than I do. But that said, if you have people that are new and coming in and they have to then process everything all at once, they're going to have real difficulty doing that. And so you're completely right. It's finding the right balance. And it's a tough balance to find sometimes. It's not easy. You just got to work on it. Yep.
I was going to say, that is a 27-inch monitor, but half the other people have got 20s or something.
Exactly.
Back in the old days.
Exactly. I had one customer of mine, I hope he's not here. Actually, I don't think I ever met him in person. I only talked to him on the phone. But how many of you went through the FileMaker 11 to FileMaker 12 change? We have a few people in here that did that. How many of you had issues with like a solution opening it up in 12 and it became really slow? It's because there were too many objects on a layout in many cases. This one guy's like, this thing is just super, super slow. Can you take a look at it? And he sent me the solution. And he had one layout for a 27-inch monitor that had 4,000 objects on it. Oh, God. That was rough. That was a rough day. It had about 20 different main tabs at the top, and then each tab had its own tabs. And then each tab had portals with objects and more stuff. It was the craziest thing. Now, there's not a lot of turnover in this company. He's the main user of that solution. You know what? Fine if he wants to design it that way. But if he wants to hire a new person, he's got to know that it's going to take him about a year for someone to actually understand how to use that thing. Right? So know your users. Know your users. That's the biggest piece here. Okay, moving on. Where did I put the clicker? I don't know. All right, it wasn't working for me anyway. I'm just going to start. I'm going to stand back here. I'll find it later. Somebody's probably got it over there. Okay, so moving on, grids and guides. So now I've started to hopefully sketch out or get an idea of what my visual hierarchy is. I have the information I want. I have it grouped together. I know what's solution-based. I know what are the things-based or table-based, what's record-based, and children of that. And I need to start laying this out. Well, this is where grids and guides come in. Grids are helpful for a few different things. One, putting things on a grid facilitates scanning. So this is Twitter. This is the new Twitter. A lot of people are complaining about the new Twitter. But the new Twitter is out, and they are using a grid here. Each of those so a grid is made up of kind of two things here. The pink bands that you see here are the columns, and each column in this case is about 120 points. And then in between those columns are what we call gutters. In this case, the gutter is 16 points. And so this is basically saying, creating these columns and these gutters so that I can say, hey, you know what, take all of these columns, these 5 columns, group them together, form one massive column. But then I know that the gutter I'm going to have here between this and the navigation on the left, as well as this between the information I have on the right, is going to be uniform and similar. And then keeping it in these column grids allows my eye to just kind of scan down this if I'm looking for a specific bit of information in this list. Right? I can easily scan and find the information that I need. And in this case, this is doing what's called like an F pattern with your eyes, where I kind of read out and then come back and go down and then read out and then come back. Or from your guys' perspective, I read out, I come back, I go down, I read out, I come back, right? Or an E, depending upon how many times you're reading it, right? But you know, you get the idea. Now, those kind of grids that are out there that are really popular on the web these days are fantastic. Unfortunately, the options within FileMaker are somewhat limited. And I'm happy that the SE from FileMaker just left as I said that. They're limited. This is the default grid options that are in the inspector. And the way to read this is that this is going to say, hey, there's major lines on your grid every 72 points. And we're going to create minor grid steps. We're going to create 8 for every 72 that you have, which is really tough to look at and read. And you have to start doing some math here. Does anybody want to do the math? How many points are between my minor grid steps? 9. That's a really weird number. I can't divide 9 by 2. Well, I can, but I don't get a whole number. Right? Like it's really an interesting number to work with. I don't know why this is the default, and it drives me batty, but it is. You can change this default. And so what I recommend are one of these two. I use the one on the left in this case, which is 64 by 8. And 64 divided by 8 is 8, an 8-point pixel, or 8-point grid. 8-point grid's super handy because I can divide 8 by 2 and get 4. So if I really need to somehow scoot something in there, because not everything's going to fit perfectly on the grid. So you can have something a little bit off, but it gives me some flexibility there. I'm also, as I said, I was a music major in college, and so anybody else was in band or choir or something like that? How many of you that were in band or choir can do math like the multiples of 4 like it's nobody's business, right? Like 4, 8, 12, 16, because it's just how music is. It's really weird. You can do multiples of 4. So this is really easy for me. I can do 8 because 8's a multiple of 4, and so everything's a multiple of 4 in that case. If you're not as good with that and can't do that and do that kind of math, I'd suggest doing the one on the right here, in which case I have a 10-point grid. 10-point grid's still pretty good. I can divide it in half if I need to and do 5 points if I really need to. But it's still pretty simple for me to put stuff onto a grid in that case. So, and this is different than the grid I was talking about before where I had these individual columns. This has nothing to do with that. There are no columns, there's no gutter, all of that stuff disappears. FileMaker doesn't have that. And it makes it a little bit tough. So you have to kind of work on things yourself. So this number here, this 8-point grid or this 10-point grid, how do I end up using that? Well, let's take a look at that layout that I was just showing before for my superior stage thing. All right? So that button up at the top there is actually, I think it's 48 points tall. Well, 48 divides by 8, that's perfect. And also the padding around it on either side is all 8 points. And also in other parts on this layout, down here I'm using 16 points. So I have 8 times 2 is 16. I'm using 16-point padding or gutters in this case around all of my objects. And so we end up using this grid to make things uniform so that everything looks polished of actually how many of us have seen things, actually I probably should have showed it on that layout before, where it's the distance between this and this is here, but the distance between that and the next thing is like this. It's just looks like I was just throwing stuff on a layout without thinking about it. we're taking some time and we're gonna put stuff in and know what our gutters are and know how much space I need to put individual objects. This is really where polishing starts. This is where the polish starts. The stuff before was making sure I'm putting it in the right place so people can find it. Now I can start polishing it, okay? So, that's grids. FileMaker also has a thing called guides. How many of us have used guides in FileMaker? Super handy. And so I actually created some guides because I had multiple layouts within this solution that used this same concept of a smaller column on the left and a bigger column on the right. And so I created some guides and I locked them into the solution so they turn pink there. And you'll see, you can see it up in the header there. There's my 8x8 grid, right? Every little line there is 8 points from the next thing. And I put those pink lines, you can see the pink lines, those are my guides to say this column exists here and it's 16 points from the edge. And that column ends here. And the next column starts 16 points from that. And then I have the column of that, and then at the far end I have another point where that stops. And so this allows me to keep in very good, or making sure things line up and stay in the same spot. So again, I can facilitate scanning so a user can read down that really well and know what I'm looking for and not have to jump around with their eyes. And also I can go from layout to layout and still be able to see, and my eye is going to the same spot of the screen. So, my suggestions for using grids and guides in FileMaker are to first choose that gutter or padding size. I like to use 8 points. If you like to use 10 points, more power to you. Choose some sort of standard padding or gutter size that you're going to use and set your grid up for that. You will need to do some math. I'm sorry. part of being good at this does involve math. I should say, I'll show it to you guys a little bit later. There's an app out there called Solver, S-O-U-L-V-E-R, Solver, that is a super awesome calculator type. It's not really a calculator, but it has multiple lines where you can type in different things. And it says hey, what's this times 8? And it shows you the number. And then you can use that number and say okay, I'm gonna create a calculation based off of the answer to that one. You can keep typing. I'll show you guys in a little bit. It's super awesome, but I use it all the time when I'm doing this kind of math. Then decide where your columns are going to be. If you started to sketch out an idea, or maybe you have a layout that you have there, start to sketch out where those columns are going to be. And then set guides in your layout to match those columns that fit to your grid. That's the first thing. Now that you have that grid is only helpful if you can move things around that grid super easily. And the best way to do that is to do two things. Three things. One, you probably saw it there on the other screen. I have snap to grid turned on. I almost always have snap to grid turned on, so I know that as I'm moving stuff, it fits to the grid. The problem with snap to grid, though, is that if an object isn't, the height of that object isn't divisible by the grid, the top will snap, and then the bottom will snap, and then the top will snap, and then the bottom will snap. And you're never really sure, is this on the grid or is this not on the grid? I don't know. I can't tell. So technique I use on this is that I make sure, one, that all of my objects, my fields, my labels, their height and their width are divisible by the grid. I can either do that with math, or I can actually resize things, and I'll show you this really quickly on how to resize stuff, so that I know that it's fitting the grid properly. And then secondarily, make sure that your headers, your body, and your footer are also lining up to your grid. If those are a little bit off, then you're not going to get the right gutters and the right alignments on that. So actually, before we hop into starting to create a layout, let me show you a little bit of what I was talking about here. I'm just going to bring up the file we're going to use in a minute here. But you'll see in this file, if you actually go into layout mode yourself, where's my cursor? There you are. That this has that same 64x8 grid. And then if I wanted to put something on this layout, if I'm creating a new thing, using this button up at the top here to create new things is really tough because wherever you drag, it doesn't put it on the grid. Wherever you start dragging from, it's come on, FileMaker, just put it on the grid for me. What are you doing? So you drag something out. Well, I know that bottom's on the grid, so I'll just end up like taking the top one and just moving it so that it lines up to the grid. And you'll see here, actually, if you see that little box next to it, it says its width is 136 by 40. Well, that lines up to the grid. 136 is divisible by 8, 40 is divisible by 8. So that's my quickest way of, like, if you have an object, you want to get it on the grid, take its top corner with snap to grid on, move it to the grid. Take its bottom corner and move it to the grid with snap to grid on. That's your best way to ensure that the size of this thing. And now I can move this thing around all I want, and it's always going to be on my grid somewhere. Yay, it's always on the grid. Okay? Questions about that? Questions about turning on grids and resizing objects and stuff?
I have a question. So the smaller numbers that are in the top base theme bars,
Yeah.
that's the individual eights, right? So how are the other squares bigger than that?
What do you mean, the other squares? Like,
On the top, they're smaller little cubes, and then in the middle, they're a bigger square.
I think you see the minor grid lines on the top, and only the major ones down below.
yeah, so yeah, down here, I wish I don't have zoom on. Yeah, down, if you're looking in the white area, these lighter gray, yeah, you can't really see the lighter gray lines that well.
Okay.
They're there, yeah, you only really see them in the header because of the contrast on this thing. But if you look in the header there, the lines that you're seeing, I can see it on my screen, yeah, you won't be able to see it up here right now. But yeah, they're everywhere. And actually here, so yeah, let me drag this up here and I'll show you that as I click on the top thing, you'll see it's moving to the grid. And if I resize it, I know that its height and width are going to line up to that grid. Now, that's when I'm creating a new object, I'll do that, but most of the time, I'll be completely honest, once I get something I like and I have a height and width I like, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, copy, paste, right? That's your way to make sure it's gonna line up to the grid. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna create a shell layout. There is a layout in the file that you guys downloaded that is an example of this. But what I'd like you to do is create a layout in your system that's going to be, and it can be based on one of the ones you're designing or you want to work on. And what I want you to do is based around, again, some of the visual hierarchy principles we talked about. I want you to set your grid settings. I want you to add in guides so that you know where your columns are going to be. And then I want you to just basically draw out rectangles that fit your grid and fit your guides, and start to just put words of like, this information is going to go here. This information is going to go here. This information is going to go here. All right? Just to start, actually, have any of you, when you were building your first scripts and someone said, write a script in comments first, and like comment out everything it's going to do, and then write the script after? This is the same idea, but we're doing it for layouts. We're just placing, here's where the thing is going to go. So I can move stuff around and redo stuff before I really commit to putting everything on. All right, so start doing that. Say that again? The grid, yeah, great question. The grid itself is, for those of you who have never seen it, it's in the inspector on the very first, the ruler tab of the inspector at the very bottom. I'll be honest, once I have kind of the fields and objects and everything set to the grid the way I want it to, I normally turn off show grid because that does add a lot of visual clutter. And so I'll turn that off, but I normally have it on at first. But I keep snap to grid on. I almost always keep snap to grid on. I'm going to bring up one other thing that someone just asked, and we're going to move on. Just for time, I want to make sure I get to the rest of this content. Somebody asked about iPad or designing for iPad. What do we do in that case? And one of the other reasons I use that 8-point grid is because, for those of you who don't know, the standard width of like an iPad in portrait is 768. 768 is divisible by 8. 768 is not divisible by 10. I mean, again, all of these are, but we're talking about getting a whole number, right? So 768 is divisible by 8, so 8-point grid works well. Also, if I turn that iPad landscape, now my width is 1024. 1024 is also divisible by 8. So that's why an 8-point, that's why one of the other reasons I like to use the 8-point grid. Okay, so let's move on from the grid stuff. Spent a lot of time on this early stuff, but this is really the important stuff. This is the basic stuff to get to before we start doing all the stuff we're going to move to next. Before we move to the next thing, as you probably just tried to do and struggled with a little bit yourself, grids and guides in FileMaker need an overhaul, in my opinion. And so I'm going to give you guys a mission to go find a FileMaker employee, preferably someone in product management. I don't know, Robert Holsey as an example. He's around, you'll find him. And tell him, I was just at Matt's session and it was really tough doing grids and guide stuff. Can we get like grids that have like columns and gutters? And can we have a default that isn't like a 9-point grid? And can we have like objects, like when I create a new object, like from all of those different things that actually fits on the grid? Like that would be nice, wouldn't it? So that's your mission if you choose to accept it, is go to talk to those people. Because I will say, since I work for Capital One, this might be my last DevCon for a little bit, and so I can't bug them anymore. It's your job now. Okay? Yep.
There was a discussion yesterday, I think it was Robert Halsey talking about it, that someone was complaining that once you set the grid, it applies to every layout.
Yes. Yeah, he was saying someone was complaining that once you set a grid, it applies to every layout. You can't have different grids for different layouts. That's another good point. If you do that kind of, yeah.
And they said they were going to change it.
Well, let's hope so. Okay, so that's putting stuff in the right place. We're going to use information architecture to build better navigation. We're going to use information architecture and visual hierarchy to make sure that we're grouping like elements together on our layout so that people can find the information that they need better. And then we're going to use grids and guides to help give it some polish for padding, as well as help guide our users' eyes to the information that they need easier. Okay. Now, I mentioned this already, so I'm going to do it a quick one here. None of this means anything if this doesn't work for your users. All of this AI inventories and stuff that you should be doing should be based on research that you are doing with your users and understanding their needs, their questions, their things, how their work happens. If you're just taking a guess and stabbing at it yourself, you're probably going to be wrong. So test your assumptions, work with your users and understand what they're trying to do. All right, now let's make some things look good. We're starting to put some stuff on layouts. We want to make it look good. So in order to make it look good, we're going to focus on two areas. One is using colors, and the other one is using themes. So first rule of using colors. The title is use high contrast for readability, but I prefer to say don't get cute when it comes to making things legible. People want to be able to read the information on their screens. So use high contrasts. Use dark text on light backgrounds or light text on dark backgrounds. One of the things that I'll be honest, I was someone who did this a bit too much at times, is using gray on gray, gray text on a gray background. That's really difficult for people to read. How many of you could read what those labels were at the top? It's really tough. Gray text on a gray background is not super helpful, right? You're not making it look fancy. You're just making it harder for people to do what they want to do in their solutions. So that's the first rule of color. It's all right to not use color. Black and white are also colors, all right? You can use those colors to make it readable. That's the first thing you want to do, okay? One other thing that I'll bring up here, though, is that surprisingly, I've read some research recently, both that Capital One did internally as well as some other outside research. As much as a lot of people really enjoy dark mode, and obviously it's becoming kind of a trend for dark mode because it just came out on iOS recently in this past year. Everybody loves dark mode and needs to have a dark mode of something. Some people really hate dark mode. Really hate it. Most people that like dark mode and prefer dark mode are used to light mode. They're used to it. They're fine with it. They're okay with it. They don't love it. They're fine with it. But some people really hate dark mode. So again, know your users. If you're going to build something that has light text on a dark background, Know your users and see if that's, make sure it's going to work for them. All right, so that's first thing. Polish needs to be readable. It needs to be readable. Second, you're going to need to choose a color scheme. And choosing a color scheme can be tough. I assume that most of you who are here do not think of yourself as a visual designer. Anyone? A little bit, got a few. If you're not and don't really know how to pick colors or choose colors, there are tools out there to help you with this. This is the website Adobe or color.adobe.com. If you've never been to it, we're going to go to it in our next activity. So feel free to start pulling it up, color.adobe.com. It has two really awesome parts to it. One is the part where I can put in a color. So if I have like a company and I know that my company's logo has this color in it, I'm going to start there. And then it gives you a bunch of options of like find complementary colors, compound colors, different shades of that same color, a triad, monochromatic. It gives you a bunch of different options so that you can come up with different color palettes based around a specific color that you start with. If you don't know where to start and you're not liking any of the options that you get there, don't worry. Go to the Explore tab on color.adobe.com and they have thousands of palettes that visual designers, or at least you hope visual designers, have put together. Feel free to steal any of those. They're there for you. It's perfect. I use that tool all the time. And so you're like, okay, I'm choosing these color palettes. What are those colors going to be used for? Well, for me, they're mostly used for two things. They're used for buttons. So any kind of button that I want to make interactive, I'm going to use some sort of color on probably, maybe. And so in this case, I have a real big button as well as kind of, an icon-y button, right? I'm going to use colors there. And I might also use a little bit of colors for things like headers and backgrounds. But also remember, rule 1, don't get cute if there's going to be text and stuff on here. So, this is where you start to come up with shades of this blue. I like this blue. Maybe let's get a little bit darker blue or get a little bit lighter blue. And that's what I'm going to use for my headers and backgrounds. Still has a little bit of color to it. Adds a little bit of something. So everything isn't just black and white. So my suggestion for you as you're trying to come up with a color palette here is to pick 3 colors. You're going to want a primary color. I tend to go with something that's more warm, that isn't super in your face, so like a blue or a green. This is what I tend to use. But also if your company has a primary color that they use and you want to brand it based on the company that you're building it for, go there first. Start there. Depending upon the solution, I'll come up with a secondary color if I think it needs it. In this case, I'll go further into warmer colors. I chose green in this case, but I could even get into yellows or golds or oranges if I really want to, sometimes even purples. And then I always like to have a third warning color, a color that I'm going to use for, oh no, something bad is happening, or you need to watch out for this thing. And so I normally, again, go with a red. I think most of us will, or most of us, I think probably here, or at least I know, I'm always kind of building for, people in the US. And for the people in the US, red means bad. In other cultures, that might not mean bad. So maybe that's not the right color to use if you're building in China, per se. But in the US, red means bad. I always use kind of red for a warning color because that's most of the stuff I'm building. Once you have those colors, come up with different shades of those colors. You probably want a lighter one. You probably want a darker one. You want to get some different shades of those colors because you're going to use them for different purposes, and we're going to get to some of those purposes later. Okay, so here's the next exercise. Go to color.adobe.com, and I want you to create your own palette. And as you start playing with it and choosing the 3 different colors that you want, copy their hex values. Actually, I'll show you these on the website itself. So here's adobe.color.com. You'll see right at the bottom here, there are these hex values. Those are the values we are going to use and eventually put into our FileMaker system. Luckily, FileMaker does take these hex values. So create the colors that you want, and actually if I go over to the Explore section as an example, and There's a specific color that I like. Of course, this is now going to take forever because the internet is slow here. If anybody has having trouble on the internet, I understand. Well, I will say one of the cool things while this is loading, color.adobe.com allows you to like put in a picture. So if you have an image of something, like maybe a logo or something, you can put in that image and it'll create a palette for you, which is pretty nice. But if I click on one of these, oh, I don't want to click add a library. I click on this, you'll see the hex colors at the bottom here, and I can click copy to actually copy those colors, and it copies to my clipboard, and I can paste it elsewhere. So that's your next task. Spend some time, come up with a color palette. All right, we're gonna come back together here. Somebody was asking about like, is it easy? Like, can I just like type in the value of where I want my guide to be in FileMaker? No, you can't. You should be able to. You can't. So another thing to go to FileMaker and complain about. Or not complain, suggest politely that you would like them to change the behaviors of that. All right. So let's move forward into, so we have a color scheme or a palette that we're going to use. So let's talk about themes. How many of you have tried to use themes before within FileMaker? How many of you have found them a little bit tough and you're not really sure, like, how should I use this? Should I create a new style or not? Anybody have that kind of issue? Well, I'm here to tell you that unfortunately there's no magic elixir. There's no silver bullet. Building a good theme and working with a good theme and keeping it up to date takes one thing, and that's cultivation. This isn't me in the picture. Literally, I put garden into Google, and this is the picture that came up, and I was like, yeah, I'm using it. Because I want to confuse you guys to think it's me. But themes need to be cultivated. Themes need to be cultivated. You need to be able to take the time to think about what are the different types of objects I have. You need to create an object inventory, right? Same kind of inventory. What are the types of objects I have? What can I reuse from layout to layout? And unfortunately, most of us don't have the time to do that. If you do have the time to do that, I'd recommend, as you're building a solution, every few months go back and look at your layouts and see where there are things that are off of your theme and see if you need to add a style for it. It just takes time. There's no silver bullet here. So my best suggestion for you, though, if you're kind of getting used to this and getting new to it, is to use a base theme and then just tweak it as necessary. Feel it's all right to use the base theme and then apply local styling. That's a great place to get started. And luckily, in that solution that you guys hopefully all downloaded, you have a base theme. I gave it to you. I created one for you that has some styles and objects on it. And this is a pretty standard base theme that I even use for some of the stuff that I design, at least as a starting point. I at least need these things when I'm creating a new solution. All right, so you have that available to you within that file to start as the base theme. And then just tweak it as necessary. And obviously, one of the things that you're going to tweak for your base theme is you're going to want to apply a color palette to it. Well, luckily, that's going to be our next thing. So everybody was asking, where do I take these colors now that I have it? Go into that file that I gave you and go to the base theme layout and take those hex values and start to apply them to all of the different objects that have colors, like the different buttons. And if there are other sections that have it, it's mostly buttons in this case, so we'll leave it to there. And if you've never done this before, let me show you how to do this. This is basically how you'll end up going about doing this. So I have a button here. If I click on the third tab of the inspector, it looks like a little color palette if I was oil painting, an oil painting color palette. And you'll see I have the solid color here. If I click on that, I can paste in right here that hex value. So remember I talked about, from here you can copy a hex value. Or let me copy this dark blue. I can come in here, click on this, and paste that value in. That's one way to do it. You can also use this tool to the magnifying glass tool to find the color you want. If you have both screens kind of open, so maybe let's pretend I have this is off on the side here and I want that light blue, I can come here and say, click the magnifying glass tool, find that blue and select it. But I'll take those color palettes and apply it to these buttons that you have here. All right, that's your next thing. Go and do that. There we go. Does everybody have their colors applied to their theme? Now actually, once you apply those colors, you will want to save it to the theme, and if you've never actually saved to a theme before, notice I changed that blue color here. You'll see right at the top here, hey, I'm changing it for the style called primary button, and this button is red right next to it. That's telling me, hey, you haven't saved this to the theme yet. So I can go and save changes to the current theme, or to the current style. Then this turns red. Then I have to click on that and save it to the theme. So this is what I'm saying, there's no silver bullet. You gotta really be intentional and know what you're doing. I will say that most of the times when I have a theme that is specific to a solution, I will start with a layout like this. I will have a layout like this that has all of the different objects of different types on it. And actually, I learned this from Matt Petrowski. If you want to learn anything you want to know about themes, go listen to Matt Petrowski. He knows, he's forgotten more information than I know about themes. But he does this same technique of having one layout that has all of the different object styles on it. So I can go to it as necessary. And if I need to make a change to my theme globally, I do it here first. Okay, so I have things placed in the right spot. I have them looking good using themes and using some colors. So again, actually, to finish off this part, make sure you're using high contrast for readability. Readability is your first goal of using colors. Make it readable. Come up with a color scheme or color palette with 2 to 3 main colors, and then use a base theme and just tweak it with your color scheme as necessary, and then start applying this theme to your layouts. Question?
So if you have a page or a layout for your base theme and you made changes there, does it retroactively apply all the changes throughout your file, or do those
It depends, and it depends on a few things. So I went through and did that save to style, save to theme. If you do save to style, then save to theme, it will then save any changes and push them to any layout, any object that has that style across all layouts. So it will do that for you, which is why we kind of do it from one layout. So I'm only really making changes like that in one place. Because if you kind of do it onesie, twosie between different layouts, what ends up happening is you're like, okay, I'm going to save this to the theme, and it's great. And then a week later, people are like, I can't read the text on that button on blah, blah, blah layout. You're like, I didn't touch that layout in 4 months. Why is there a problem? Oh crap, that theme I changed. So yes, you want to be very careful with that, which is why we use it from one base layout. Yep.
Do you have a general guideline that you recommend for how many items you put in things? We have a really large solution that has hundreds of layouts.
Yep.
And thought we would transition to themes, and we found that as we
The question is there a guideline for like how many types of objects or how many types of styles you would have in your theme? It's one of those as much as you feel comfortable with. Like if you are the main developer on it or you have a set of few developers on it, that it's okay having 200 different types of text formatting and you know and have a naming convention to know what each of those things mean, then great, do that. But you'll again, it's part of that cultivation piece. You'll need to have a naming convention. You'll need to know so you can easily select through that list. If you don't have the time to do that and really like think through how I'm going to name stuff so that I can find it properly, so that I know exactly what it is and how this is different than something else, if you don't have time to really do that, then I would say having 200 types of styles for something is going to be a detriment to you because it's never really going to be helpful because the whole idea of a theme is, again, this concept of I can change it in one place and it changes it everywhere. That's the concept of why you'd have a theme. That's why you want that. So if you can't do that because like you have 200 different things and you're not sure, and if you change it in one place, does it really change it everywhere else? I don't know. Then that's not really any use at that point.
So if you have some items that you have submitted to the thing, like you know that all buttons are in medium or whatever, but other text items you know are going to be really fluid and there's not a good structure to name it across the whole solution.
Yep.
Then if you don't apply a theme to it, then are you going to get that red triangle and then
You will get the red triangle, and the red triangle isn't the worst thing in the world.
okay, because I keep hearing everybody say you don't want a red triangle, you don't want a red triangle.
That's for payload.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like it depends upon how much you do, like how much styling you're doing to it. Like if it's just like, oh, I'm putting it to the left versus the right, or I'm doing like a little thing like that, yes, there's a little bit of payload, but it's text. Like having one image on your layout is probably the same, like is equal to having 500 objects, each with a little bit of styling on them. Like at the end of the day, it's not going to really affect it that much. You should try your best. If you can, yeah, do that. And so like if you're really changing like 8 or 10 or 20 things and you're doing that on like every different thing that you're putting out there, then yeah, maybe think of like, well, let's start here. I'm going to have this text size on the left and this text size on the right, and I'm just going to make little minor tweaks to that. Once you start getting into the 8 or 10 things that you're changing about something, then yeah, maybe you need to think about applying some sort of style to that. Especially if you're reusing it. If you're reusing that same thing in multiple places, then yeah, have style to it. Or you're just adding.
Going to comment that I think the restriction that she's referring to, where they want you to get rid of those red things, is when you're trying to do things cloud-based, where you want to, like an iPhone or something, and the payload to download the whole CSS theme throughout the solution, it replicates it when it's not saved in the current theme. It replicates that. So it's doubling your CSS in a way.
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, you're adding some things to it, yes. But again, like it's one of those things where, have any of you heard of like, there's the concept of like over-optimization, right? It's like I'm optimizing before I need to. It's one of those things where like, yeah, is that going to have an effect? I can't say it won't. But you know what? Your data model will probably affect your performance a lot worse than your CSS will. You know, and if you have images and other things on it, that's going to affect it a lot worse than your CSS will. So to like worry, it's almost like, it's that idea of like, I just spent $1,000 on a TV, but like I'm really happy that I saved 5 cents on like that thing that I got for sale. It's like, but you just spent $1,000. Like, does 5 cents really matter in that case? Probably not. So it's one of those of just knowing like, yes, you're right. It will affect it. It will make it better. But you probably have a lot of other things on your solution that'll improve it before you have to worry about the CSS, to be completely honest. Okay, moving on. Oh yeah, sorry, one more question, yep. Oh yeah, so the themes live, if you go under File, Manage Themes, you will see the themes there, and from within there you can import themes from one solution to another solution. So this base theme, if you like it and you want to use it in the future, go to your solution, go to File, Manage Themes, and you can import this one into that other file. Great question. Sorry I didn't cover that. So moving on, again, I'm going to keep saying this, I'm going to hammer it home. You need to test these things. Test your assumptions, show these to your users, make sure that the color schemes and the things that you're using actually work for them. Hey, actually, do any of you know if you have colorblind people within your office? You probably do. I know I do, right? Like maybe that color scheme you use, like there's no difference between the blue and the green. They look exactly alike to that person. Test your stuff, all right? Okay, moving on. On to the last thing. You guys, you've made it so far. We've only got 25 minutes left. You've made it so far into this. It's a long session. I'm proud of you for sticking it out. So let's move on to making things interactive. There's going to be two things that we're talking about with making things interactive, and these are the two things that we mostly interact with in solutions. Data entry, typing in stuff into a solution, typing things in, and the things I'm having trouble with right now, buttons. These are the things that people interact with the most. And I might a little bit at times in this portion of the session get a little bit preachy. Kristen will know this because this is the stuff I like hounded her on all the time. So I apologize in advance, but it's going to happen. So let's talk about data entry and buttons. First rule of data entry, make it obvious what is editable and what is not editable. This seems so simple. It seems so obvious. Look into your solutions and see if you have different styles for fields that are editable versus not editable. You probably don't. You probably aren't using that consistently in some sort of consistent metaphor. So in this case, in this screen, will anybody want to shout out which field they think is not editable? The gray one, yeah, the discount number, right? And why would someone say, like other than it just being gray, but like other than that, like what about it is telling you it's not editable? Yeah, and the other ones have lines around it that say that these are things that I can click into, right? Okay, how about this one? Which is editable and which aren't editable? Discount's editable, the other ones are not editable because there's this little box around it. And the color of that box, the background color is white, or it matches the background color of the thing it's on. These are the mental models and the visual cues that we can use to our customers to say, or our users, this is editable, these are not. And so here are just a few examples. These aren't the only examples. You can have other metaphors as well. But I've found these to be the best examples of saying, hey, this is editable, and if I use these are not. Okay, question?
Can you do the theme and change it based off of a privilege set? Like if somebody's allowed to change it and somebody's not?
No. So the question was, can I do like themes or styles like this off of privilege sets? I mean, you kind of can, but not full functionality. In many cases like that, what I would use is like show hide. There's that option to show hide. So I would have one object that shows for the people that can edit it, and I would have another one that shows for the people that can't edit it. And so it's mutually exclusive if I get one or the other. Was that what you were going to say, Doug? Or a different layout. Yeah, there's that too. Yep. Oh, if it does, I still like to have, because people still need to be able to read it. I like having numbers. Well, that is true, but I think they're still trying to read it at times. But I get your point. I think even in this case, you'd still think that that's editable, though, right? Yeah, maybe not. Okay. I'm not going to be, you know what, if you were my client and you said, I don't know because it has a comment in it, I'd take it out for you. Because that's what a good developer does. Yep. Exactly. He said, his quote there was, win an argument, lose a customer. Exactly. Yep. Okay, that's rule one is that. Rule two of data entry is allow your users to stay on their keyboard while they're doing data entry. The first example of this that I'll give, and I apologize that this is kind of washed out, you can't really see all of the stuff there. Believe me, there are actual borders around those fields. So all of those are a thing. But the first thing about keeping the hands on the keyboard, and I'm surprised how many times I run into this, but if someone has clicked a button and you know the thing that they're going to do right after that button is start typing, For the love of God, put the cursor in the field that they're going to start typing in. Don't make them click again. It's one script step, guys. It's one script step. It's not that hard. Go to field. Use it. All right? Do that. So that's step one. It's a simple thing, but you'd be surprised like how much like it just makes it feel more polished and usable for people. It's like, oh, and then I go there and I just start typing. Part two of this. Really, really, really obsess over your tab order, including buttons. How many of us only do fields on our tab order and kind of are like, well, there's a button, I don't care. You know what? There are some people that really can't use mouses that well and actually prefer to stay on their keyboard. Think about tab order. So in the example here, you can't, again, it's a little bit washed out, I apologize. But after someone types in the show name, when they hit tab, it's then time for them to put in a customer. And there's a customer field here that looks just like any other field with a rectangle around it. Again, you guys can't really see it that well. There's a field there, or looks like there's a field there. But when they hit tab, what we know is that, well, they really select a customer in this popover. And so what we're going to do is we're going to when they tab out of show name and tab into that popover button, which we've included into the tab order, we have a script trigger that fires that opens up the popover. And guess what? Because when it opens up the popover, the first thing they're going to start doing is typing a customer name. We've put the cursor right into the search field at the top. And then they can start typing the name. And then after they type the name a little bit, they can hit tab and tab between the records that show up in the list or the portal below and hit spacebar or enter to select the customer that they want. And then the cursor pops into the location field. They've never had to go to their mouse once. Right? This takes time. This is not easy. This is not quick. This takes time. But you'd be surprised how awesome this is. I'll be honest, the first time we built this and showed it to this customer, we're like, hey, we want you in front of us to test adding a new show to the system that we're building for you. And they're like, all right. And so, there's the big add show button at the top there. They click that, they're like, all right, this shows this. They hit tab, they start typing the name. They tab, click, go to the name, start typing it, and they get to the end, they're like, yeah, that was great. That was easy. They're like, and they were surprised. They're like, that was really good. and everybody's like, okay, great. The customer's happy. Everybody's super happy. There were some things we still had to tweak on it. There were still things we learned from that. But this was the coolest thing for them. They were so yeah, it just works. It's great, perfect. When can we have it? Can we have it tomorrow? We want it tomorrow. Yeah. Okay, question? There's a question? Well, I think in that case, if I'm tabbing still through that, then it's still kind of like I'm going to search for another client. Like I'm assuming you're still tabbing into that field because if I'm tabbing through those things, it's most likely because I'm doing some sort of data entry. And I will say if you tab out of that search bar, sometimes it goes into the next thing, but actually I think what I did there was the tab goes into the portal, and then if I hit tab again, it takes you out of the portal into location, but I can use the arrow keys to go up and down. So I was using some script triggers and stuff on it. But you can still kind of keep tabbing and get to the next thing without having to select a customer.
Is the danger when you have some applications, especially in the finance world, is that people are keying into so many data.
Mm-hmm.
If you have too much of those, I would say, fancy things, you drive them crazy too.
Well, again, I think in this case, that person is happy that they can keep their hands on their keyboard. But you're right, it's about the user. It's understanding the balance with that user so that it's working for them in the right way. And if we found that that doesn't work in some of those examples, then you're right, we would have to make some sort of change to it. Okay, so here's what we're going to try to do. And I know we'll spend a little bit of time on this, but go into a layout that you have that has some sort of data entry on it. And I want you to, well, first off, if there's any script that takes you to that layout, like you just showed me, go to data entry, add in a script step on there to put the person's cursor in the first field, if it isn't there already. Do that, and then test out your tab order, And then also start to change the styles. If you know any of those fields are not editable, start to do that. We're going to spend a few minutes doing that, okay? All right. Let's move on. We got one thing to get through. We got about a little bit more than 10 minutes left. And so maybe we won't save the activity on this. We'll just say like, hey, if we have some time and you guys want to stick around, again, I'm cool sticking around if you guys want to keep working on some of this stuff or ask some questions. But the last thing here is we're going to talk about buttons. This one, again, seems obvious. It doesn't sound that different than data entry. Make it obvious what is clickable. Make it obvious what is a button, right? It's surprising to me how often people will make things and try to get cutesy about this, and you're like, is that something I'm supposed to click? I'm not sure if that's a thing I can click or not. Well, there's a few things you can do to make it obvious that it is clickable. One of the things you can do, actually, or before I hop into that, for me, I like to think that there are kind of two types of buttons. There's the button that, like, if you asked your user, hey, there's a button in the top right, click it, they'd know that that's a button. And then there's like the button that is in a portal row that they wouldn't say that that's a button. We know it's a button as a FileMaker developer, that they would click on that portal row and there's a button there. But they're just thinking that they're clicking on a portal row, right? They're not really thinking of that as a button. One of them is a little bit more subtle, a little bit more hidden. This one's very obvious that they would think it's a button. And they are slightly different in some ways, but have a lot of the same characteristics. We're going to first focus on the obvious button first. And, okay, 8th time, there we go. First thing about making it obvious that it's editable, use either some sort of high contrast, that's why we have these primary colors, so that if I put a thing with a blue color on top of a white background, it's going to be very obvious where the borders are of that thing. If I don't have something with like a high contrast background color, put a border on it. Even still in this case, I have this little light white border around the edges of it, just to give it a little bit to say this is where this thing is, and that is something that is clickable. Yep?
What about this outer or inner shape?
We'll get there in a second. Good question. So, how many of us remember when iOS 7 came out and it was like, hey, we're moving to like flat design and that's awesome, right? Anyone remember that? How many of us remember the first buttons in iOS 7 looked like this? And everybody complained because they didn't know if those were buttons or not. And you know who really complained? The colorblind. Because they couldn't tell if that was white or gray or what. They had no idea what was a button and what wasn't a button. It was a real misstep for Apple. But they fixed it. In iOS 8, they did that. Right? Surprising how just that little bit of addition of a little border around it makes you know, oh, that's something I can tap on or that's something I can click on. Right? Okay. So moving on, that's the first thing. Give it a little border. Give it very obvious where this thing ends. Second, use your hovered and pressed and in-focused states. Use the colors of that. So basically, your regular state, your normal state of a button, you're using borders and color to tell the person, hey, I'm a button. And then when they hover over it, the color change, and it's like, yeah, I'm really a button. And then they click it, and it's like, you clicked me, yay! I know I'm going to go do something now. Right? Those three things are super helpful for users. We kind of gloss over them. We don't think about them too much. But how many of us have gone to a button and clicked it and like it didn't do anything and then we clicked it 5 more times? These things matter. And this is why we were talking about colors with shades, and you want to have a little bit lighter shade and a little bit darker shade, because your hover, I normally do it a little bit lighter. It kind of pops out. It feels like it's coming out at you. And then I use the darker shade, I use it for when I click, because you know when you click a button, it goes back, it recesses, and normally when something goes back, it gets a little bit darker. So I use a darker color. And then the last one is, so we had the question about using inner shadows or outer shadows. I use those in a lot of cases for when using the in focus thing. Again, some people like to stay on their keyboard. In focus basically means someone is tabbed to that button, but they haven't clicked on it. So I pretend that's like hover. I use the same color as hover, but I add some sort of, in this case you'll see this blue shadow around the edges of it to say, hey, here's where you're at. You're here. It's a nice way to say like you've tabbed into that button. Okay? So that's That's the first, that's basically how you make it obvious that a button is clickable. Yep. They can. Some do, some don't. It's up to your impression, and I'm not going to tell you if you are of the mind that buttons have to have curved corners. You know what? More power to you. I'm completely fine with that. I'm of the belief that, you know what, some people like curved corners and some people don't, and most people will still understand that that's a button that I can click. That's a good point. It's an interesting way of distinguishing between the two. You can definitely do that. I would not disagree with you in one way there, but I will say sometimes I still use sharp corner buttons. Okay, so those are the obvious buttons that we're talking about. But let's talk a little bit about lists and portals. I will say on this again, I know this is a little bit washed out. There's a fine gray line there that's separating these portal rows from each other. One of my biggest pet peeves with list views or portals is when people both try to use them as a way of viewing and navigating as well as data entry. Like, which one is it? And this came from one of the starter solutions. I made a few changes to it, so it's not like the base starter solution, but there are a few things that I dislike about it. One of them is that, like, if you zoom in here, there's just a lot of lines in there, right? There's a lot of visual clutter in this layout. And on top of that, that little button at the very end, where does it start? Where does it end? What do I click? This button doesn't even have hover on it. So, like, how do I know I'm on the button and I'm not on the button? There's no way of really actually knowing. You just have to guess and hope. These are some of my biggest pet peeves. Actually, I should ask, the only time I ever see layouts where there's like a navigation button on a list like this or a portal like this, that's at the very end and not the whole thing itself, is in really old Microsoft solutions and people's FileMaker solutions. It's the only time I see it. So don't do it. You're hurting your users. So what I do is I like to basically say to myself, is this list or portal going to be viewable and basically a thing for me to navigate and find the record that I want? Or is it going to be an editable thing where I am editing that thing? And make that decision. Which one is it? And it depends, again, based on the use case. What is the person doing at this point in time and what makes the most sense for them? All right? So for the edit one, I have a tendency to make it, again, the lines are a little bit grayed out there, but I tend to make it look like a spreadsheet or a table view in FileMaker. Because you know what? When someone sees that and sees those kind of boxes, you know what they think? That's something I can edit in. That's something I can click into and start typing. Right? They're used to that. It goes to a mental model that most of us as computer users have. So that's a technique I use when I know that this is a portal that's editable. And you'll see each field lines up with the field next to it. I don't have like 8 lines in there. There's only one line that's separating the fields from each other. There is an example of this in the example file. So if you want to see how I do this, it's in there so you can take a look at it. That's one. And then for view-only lists, I make them look almost like a mobile, if anybody is used to looking at mobile interfaces, where I have this kind of tall bar that has bits of information on it. Sometimes it has a top and a bottom, like this one has, a main info and sub info. But this, again, allows me to quickly scan and find the record I want, click on it or tap on it, and go to the place that shows me more information about that thing. So I'm using this as a view to find the thing I want to then navigate to it. Another important thing on this, and again, you can't see it in here, but you'll see it in the file that you have. Make sure that the button is just right in here so that you actually have a hover state. There's supposed to be a hover state, a gray showing there, that when I hover over it, I get a gray. You'll want to still use those hover states so the person knows, oh, this is something I can click on, and then they can click on it. All right, so actually, we're not going to do this exercise, but I want to show you something real quick. I'm going to show you a technique because this is something Kristen and I struggle with a lot. If you go to the layout in here called View Portal /List, you'll see that I have one of these view portals in here. And can you see that gray? No, you can't. I'm going to make it a little bit more obvious to you for a second. If I go to hover here, Let me make it like really obnoxious just so you guys can see it. Notice how when I hover over that, and actually let me do one other thing to this, just make this a little bit darker too. There we go. Now you guys can see that, right? Okay, perfect, good. When I do that, and what happens? I get those little white areas around the side, right? That's a little annoying. And it doesn't look polished, right? That's the whole point of this whole session is building polished solutions, right? That doesn't look good. So here's what I have a tendency to do. This is not easy. This takes a little bit of time. The first few parts of it are pretty easy, but it gets pretty hairy fairly quickly. I'm going to duplicate this just so you can see the different examples of it. I grab the button, I click on the button, I click on the portal and holding down shift so that both of them are selected. You can select multiple things. I then say, hey, align the left edge and align the top edge. Got it? Align the left edge, align the top edge. Okay, now they're aligned. Make them the same width, which is the largest width, which is the width of the portal itself, right? All of that's pretty easy. 3 button clicks, right? Click, 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 they're there. Now you're mostly there. This is where it gets annoying. You need to now make this button tall enough so that it sits in there perfectly. There's no easy way of doing this other than kind of just tweaking the height of it until you can kind of figure it out. Or one way I've found that's a little bit easier is if you drag these out, this will kind of tell you like what height the portal row is. You see it says row height 70. If I then click on this button and make it 71, you gotta make it exactly 71, one above that, and now it fits perfectly. It's that annoying, I know. But believe me, this is polish. This is where we're really getting into polish here. You came to a session about building polished solutions. This is what you have to do sometimes. Yeah, Vince?
You make your portal 1 row, and then make the height the same, and then put your portal back to the 4 rows?
I have done that as well. So yeah, what Vince is saying is make it 1 row, in which, but here's, so actually in that case, this is 73 things high, this is 70, the button is 71. And that's because like I still have a border at the top and I have a border at the bottom, so it's 2 less. So yes, that is another way of doing that. The one problem I found with doing that technique though, Vince, is that now when I need to select that portal to get back to it, I have to like get into like 1 pixel territory to click on it, or I have to go and say like, oh, come here and hide that button, because the button is going to make it really tough for me to like click into that portal and select it. So you get into some weirdness there where it's like, all right, now I have to hide the button, and now I can click on the portal, and then I can double click on that or double click on this and then make it 8 again. So that's the stuff that is like, is that any better or worse than the other way? I don't know. It's up to you. It's your flavor. But I'm just saying, like, this is where we really get into the nitty-gritty of polish, okay? If you make it too big, it's going to look weird. You make it too small, it's going to look weird. You got to get it pixel perfect, okay? All right. So we are a minute over. I apologize. So let me wrap this up real quick. Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. The last thing, so Kristen asked me to show this, and we were going to do this as the last thing, which is that when you're on your theme, when you are choosing your primary color, if you take this color here and drag it into one of these rows here, do you see me drag it into that? It gives you a lighter shade and a darker shade. This is a simple, very simple way to quickly then say like, all right, let me go to my hover, and I'm going to choose the lighter shade. Let me go to my focus or my pressed, and I'm going to choose the darker shade. Really quick. So yes, thank you. That is a simple one. I should have showed you that. Thank you, Kristen. Please use that. Okay, so making things interactive. Make it obvious what is and isn't editable. Make it obvious what's clickable. Seems like it's pretty simple, but there's some work to that. Actually, save the question for 1 second, and we'll take some questions at the end here. And again, test these things. If it doesn't make sense to your users, it doesn't matter what I'm telling you right now. You have to test these things and make sure that it's still not confusing for your users. So wrapping up the whole thing here, use information architecture and visual hierarchy to have better findable and usable solutions. Use themes and colors for consistency and also making sure people know exactly, making it look good across and consistent across all your layouts. Be obvious what is interactive and what isn't interactive. It seems like it's an easy one, but it's a big one. And again, I've said it multiple times, test, test, test. You need to test these ideas with people. So for that, I want to say thank you. This might be my last DevCon session for a while. I've spoken at 10 DevCons, but with this new job, I might not come back for a while. We'll see what happens. I mean, who knows? But I want to thank you guys. There's a lot of friendly faces in the audience that I've seen that have attended a lot of my sessions, so thank you. Really appreciate you guys coming out. I will say there will be updates that will eventually be up on the website. Please fill out an evaluation. There's the link for the evaluations. And again, I'm going to stick around here for a little bit. If you want to work on your solution, you want to talk through some things, I'm here. You might have to wait if there are multiple people asking for me. But there's nothing else in this room after this, so feel free to hang out if you want to. But thank you. Have a good rest of your DevCon. Thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Kristen. Round of applause for Kristen. She's been so helpful, all right?